Good evening from New York. For the second time in 11 days, the kind of right-wing, religious-based domestic terrorism about which the Department of Homeland Security warned and for which that department was vilified and accused of playing politics has resulted in the death of an American. Our fifth story on the countdown. This time, it occurred 1 mile from the White House. Just before 1 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Daylight Time, police saying that a man carrying a .22 caliber rifle entered the crowded U.S. Holocaust Memorial in Washington, one of the most popular museums in the country. And to quote the D.C. police chief, the second he stepped into the building, he began firing. The suspect was not merely a white supremacist and a Holocaust denier. He was a man who was part of this country's effort, he claimed anyway, to stop Hitler, a World War II vet, he claimed. Remarkably, police saying that only the gunman and one security guard were injured. That security guard, Stephen Tyrone Johns, dying a few hours later. It was because of Mr. Johns and his colleagues, police say, that the suspect never made it past the security checkpoint, and that so few people were hurt. This kind of attack, precisely what the Department of Homeland Security had been warning about 2 months ago in an assessment that predicted a rise in right-wing extremism, including hate crime recruitment pegged to the presidential election. Quoting it, the historical election of an African-American president and the prospect of policy changes are proving to be a driving force for right-wing extremist recruitment and radicalization. Most statements by right-wing extremists have been rhetorical, expressing concerns about the election of the first African-American president, but stopping short of calling for violent action. Because of Republican outrage to that report, Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano apologized for it, even while continuing to defend its contents. Thus tonight, even though if the crime had been the same and the suspect had a Middle Eastern name, Washington might be in lockdown right now. Instead, one of the network newscasts was able to dismiss the event with the headline, "Museum Mayhem." Investigators identifying the gunman as 88-year-old James Von Brunn from Eastern Maryland. On the internet, Von Brunn apparently identified himself as a Holocaust denier, as a white supremacist, as a conspiracy theorist who does not believe President Obama to be a natural-born citizen of the United States. On a right-wing conspiracy site, Von Brunn, in late November, apparently telling like-minded extremists that Holocaust memorials are enemy territory, quote, "do or die. Moving to Montana is a cop-out. The enemy is at the Fed, the networks, Wall Street, Congress, at, quote, Holocaust memorials, at synagogues, not in some sylvan mountain retreat." The next month, on another site, Von Brunn having warned again of violence, quote, "America is a third world racial garbage dump, stupid, ignorant, dead broke, and terminal. Prepare to die, white America. You deserve it." He ended with the quote, "Heil Hitler." Let's turn now to our Washington Bureau. Justice correspondent Pete Williams, who's been covering this shooting, has been good enough to stay late with us. Pete, good evening.
Keith.
Do we know?
Well, yes.
Do we know if he was acting alone? Was he acting alone?
Well, we don't for sure, but that seems to be the thought tonight. The police and the FBI both say that they believe he acted alone. They've searched his possessions. They're going through his all the things you could expect. His car was apparently left right out in front of the Holocaust Museum, and in it there was an apparent list of other targets that he may have been interested in, a dozen or so locations, including the National Cathedral here in Washington. But the police have checked all those out. Nothing to it. I think they've pretty well satisfied themselves that he was acting alone, yes.
But this is not the first time he has acted in a terroristic way against this country, correct?
No, not at all. In 1981, he came here to Washington. He was living then in New Hampshire, according to police at the time. He had some weapons, a sawed-off shotgun, a knife, and a handgun, and he went to the offices of the Federal Reserve Board here in Washington and barged his way in, saying he wanted to take pictures while the security guard was saying, "Let me see if I can get you cleared in." He went on in and got as far as the room in which the board members were meeting. And at one point, when he put the handgun in his pocket, they moved in and arrested him. He said he wanted to kidnap members of the Federal Reserve Board and make them change their policies. And he made a number of anti-Semitic statements at the time. And Keith, when he got out of prison, he put on his website that he was the victim of Negroes, quote, "Negroes on the jury and a Jewish judge at sentencing."
Back to today, Pete, this museum was packed, as it almost always is, yet nobody other than the shooter and the security guard were hit. Had they been prepared at the Holocaust Memorial for something like this, and to what degree had they been prepared?
The Holocaust Museum is one of the most threatened buildings in Washington, and since the day it opened, on which there were protests, they have prepared for something like this every day, and it really is quite astonishing. Everyone from the museum goers who were there at the time to the president is praising the security guards, and obviously for good reason. He according to the police chief, as you summarized at the beginning, he had this rifle with him. He picked up the weapon and started firing the moment he stepped through the door, and he only got a few steps inside the museum before the guards shot him down. We believe that he's in critical condition tonight. Quite surprising that he's frankly still surviving. I think some of the detectives who looked at him didn't think he'd make it that long. An 88-year-old man with a head wound, but apparently he's still in critical condition.
And one other extraordinary sidebar, I guess, to this, the former Defense Secretary William Cohen was in there at the time of the shooting?
Yes, Bill Cohen, Defense Secretary under President Clinton. His wife, Janet, had written a play called Annie and Emmett, about an imaginary conversation between Anne Frank and Emmett Till, who was killed by racists in the South. And this play has been performed in other places around the country, and it was to be performed at the Holocaust Museum tonight, Keith.
Our Justice correspondent, Pete Williams, again, we thank you for staying late with us in the Washington Bureau, Pete.
You bet. All right.